You're looking at a satellite image of the coastline of Chittagong, Bangladesh. At first glance, it appears to be just another beach. Sand, surf, and the waterline. But zoom in, and the scene transforms dramatically. Stretching for 20 kilometers along the shore are ships, dozens of them. Massive ocean tankers, container ships, bulk carriers, vessels 300 meters long, stranded nose first on the sand like beached whales. Surrounding each one is a bustling swarm of workers wielding gas cutters, methodically slicing these steel leviathans into pieces. By hand, under the open sky, without docks, cranes, or anything you might call infrastructure. This is Chittagong, the largest ship graveyard on the planet. Every year, here and in a few similar locations, Alang in India, Gadani in Pakistan, around 1,000 ocean-going vessels are dismantled. The total tonnage, millions of tons of steel. This is not a side industry, it's a global recycling system that the world's commercial fleet cannot survive without. But here's what most people don't understand. Ship dismantling is not just about scrapping for metal. An ocean-going vessel is a concentrated repository of hazardous materials. Thousands of tons of steel coated with lead paints, hundreds of tons of asbestos insulation, dozens of tons of heavy fuel, oils and lubricants, polychlorinated biphenyls lurking in electrical equipment, mercury in instruments, radioactive sources in navigation gear. Each ship is a floating collection of substances banned on land for decades, yet legally present on board because the vessel was built before the ban. And this collection needs to be dismantled, safely, environmentally, economically. This is where the collision occurs that defines the entire industry. The physics of dismantling steel structures, the economics of developing countries, coastal ecology, and international law all converge at one point. That point is a dirty beach in South Asia. It is here that the balance between cost, safety, and demand for steel finds its harsh, uncomfortable equilibrium. Today, we will delve into how ship recycling actually works, why it unfolds the way it does, and why any attempt to alter this balance encounters constraints that are impossible to circumvent. Let's start with the fundamental question. Why do ships need to be recycled at all? The average lifespan of an ocean-going commercial vessel is 25 to 30 years. Not because the hull disintegrates. Steel can last 50 years or more with proper care. The issue lies in economics. Every few years, the International Maritime Organization tightens environmental and operational standards. New requirements for sulfur emissions, engine efficiency, ballast water treatment, and hull design emerge. Upgrading an old ship to meet these new standards often costs more than the vessel itself. Furthermore, new ships are significantly more fuel efficient. The difference in fuel consumption between a ship built in 1995 and one from 2020 can reach 30 to 40%. With bunker fuel prices soaring to several $100s per ton and daily consumption ranging from 100 to 200 tons, that translates to millions of dollars saved annually. Eventually, a point is reached where it becomes cheaper to sell the ship for scrap than to continue operating it. Ship owners refer to this moment as the economic death of the vessel, the point after which every day of operation incurs a loss. The owner sells the ship to a specialized broker who exclusively handles dismantling transactions, a separate multi-billion-dollar market with its own quotes and indices. The broker then resells the vessel to a recycling yard. The price is determined by the lightweight tonnage, the weight of the empty hull without cargo, fuel, or ballast. And this is where the physics begins. An ocean-going vessel is not a car that can be crushed and flattened at a junkyard. It's a complex structure made from tens of thousands of tons of steel, meticulously welded into a single entity. The hull is composed of plating that ranges from 15 to 30 millimeters thick, reinforced with frames, stringers, beams, and bulkheads. Inside, you'll find engines weighing hundreds of tons, boilers, generators, kilometers of piping, and tens of kilometers of electrical cables, alongside ventilation systems, hatch covers, and anchor chains. Dismantling such a ship in a dry dock using industrial cranes, plasma cutters, and automated systems is technically feasible. This is precisely how ship recycling yards operate in Turkey and Europe. The vessel is brought into the dock, secured, and specialized crews methodically cut it down from the top, section by section. Every material is sorted. Hazardous substances like asbestos, lead paints, and heavy fuel are removed before cutting begins and disposed of separately, following strict environmental protocols. The challenge lies in the cost. Dismantling a large vessel in a European dock can run into several $1 million. The recycling yard must not only cover these expenses, but also turn a profit. The sole source of income is the sale of the materials recovered, primarily steel. And here lies a fundamental limitation. A ton of ship scrap in Europe fetches between $250 and $350. In South Asia, it's $400 to $500 or more. Labor costs in Bangladesh are exponentially lower than in Europe. Environmental regulations are incomparably more lenient. The infrastructure is minimal: a beach, a tidal zone, and a gas cutter. The math is unforgiving. A European yard might offer a shipowner $200 per ton for their vessel. A yard in Chittagong would offer $450. For a tanker with a lightweight displacement of 40,000 tons, the difference amounts to $10 million. No shipowner operating in a competitive market would turn down $10 million. This is why over 70% of the world's tonnage is recycled in just 3 countries: Bangladesh, India, and Pakistan. Not because they want this dirty work, but because the economic equation leaves no other solution. The method employed at Asian shipyards is called beaching. The ship is brought to shore, either under its own power or towed, during high tide. When the tide peaks, the vessel is driven at full speed towards the beach. It runs aground on the sand. As the water recedes, there stands an ocean-going ship on dry land. The sight is surreal. A 300-meter tanker resting on the beach like a beached whale, its exposed hull covered in barnacles and seaweed. No docks, no cranes. Just a beach with a tidal range of 6 to 8 meters, which twice a day reveals the ship's hull for work. The tides here serve as a free dry dock, courtesy of the moon's gravity. Dismantling begins from the top. First, everything that can be removed without cutting is taken off. Bridge equipment, furniture, doors, portholes, electronics, and lifeboats. All of this is sold on the second-hand market. Navigation instruments, captain's cabin furniture, even door handles, all find buyers. Then the cutting begins. Gas cutters, acetylene oxygen torches, slice through the steel plating and frame into manageable pieces that can be lifted and moved. Crews of workers, dozens, sometimes hundreds on a single ship, work simultaneously at different levels. Huge steel sections, severed from the hull, crash onto the sand. They are then cut into smaller pieces, loaded onto carts, and transported to rolling mills, where they are melted down into rebar. This method may be primitive, but it possesses one quality that outweighs all its drawbacks. It's cheap. Minimal infrastructure, a beach and tides are free. Minimal equipment, a gas cutter costs next to nothing. The labor force is abundant and willing to work for just a few dollars a day. But this raises an obvious question. If beaching is so cheap and effective, why doesn't the whole world send ships to the shore? Why do expensive European docks still exist? Why have international organizations been trying for decades to change this system? And here we hit a wall of limitations. The first limitation is human safety. Dismantling a ship on the beach with a gas torch is one of the most dangerous jobs on the planet. Workers cut steel at heights of several dozen meters, equivalent to the 8th or 10th floor, without safety harnesses, helmets, and often in flip-flops. Massive steel sections, severed from the hull, fall unpredictably onto the sand. Only a shout serves as a warning. Inside the hull are confined spaces filled with remnants of toxic gases, fuel vapors, and asbestos dust. There's no ventilation. The only light comes from daylight filtering through hatches. When a gas torch comes into contact with fuel or oil residues in an uncleaned tank, it can ignite. In a confined space, this leads to an explosion. Explosions at shipbreaking yards are not exceptions. They are regular occurrences. Dozens of workers die each year at yards in South Asia. Hundreds suffer severe injuries, burns, fractures, and chronic illnesses, such as asbestosis, lung cancer, and heavy metal poisoning. There's no accurate statistics because many cases go unreported. Workers often lack official contracts. The second limitation is environmental. When a ship is dismantled on the beach, everything inside it spills into the surrounding environment. Heavy fuel and oils seep into the sand and tidal zone. Lead and mercury-laden dust from cutting is blown away by the wind. Asbestos fibers enter the air. Polychlorinated biphenyls from transformers and capacitors leach into the soil. The coastline of Chittagong, where dismantling has been taking place for decades, is contaminated with heavy metals to a depth of several meters. Concentrations of lead, cadmium, and mercury in coastal waters far exceed permissible limits. Local fishermen catch fish in these waters. Local children play on this sand. The third limitation is legal. In 2009, the Hong Kong Convention for the Safe and Environmentally Sound Recycling of Ships was adopted. It sets requirements for the inventory of hazardous materials on board, working conditions at recycling yards, and environmental standards. The convention only came into force in 2025, 16 years later. Such a timeline reflects the deep contradictions between the economics of recycling and the desire to make it safe. The problem is that strict standards increase costs, and rising costs make legal recycling uncompetitive compared to beaching. Ship owners sell their vessels to intermediaries who then resell them under a different flag, and the ship ends up on the same beach, now formerly owned by a shell company in a country that hasn't signed the convention. The shadow follows the light. This situation has a name known to everyone in the industry: toxic export. Developed countries build ships, operate them for 30 years, and then export the problem of their disposal, along with all the asbestos, lead, and mercury, to the poorest countries in the world. This is not malicious intent. It's a consequence of an economic equation where the value of human life and health is assessed differently in various parts of the world. But there is an alternative model: Turkey, the shipyards of Aliağa. Here, ships are dismantled not on the beach, but on concrete platforms equipped with engineering infrastructure. There are systems for collecting oil-contaminated runoff. Workers have access to personal protective equipment. There's oversight for the removal of hazardous materials before cutting begins. The cost of dismantling is higher than in Bangladesh, but lower than in Northern Europe. Turkish shipyards occupy an intermediate niche, a compromise between cost and standards. But even Turkey cannot compete with South Asia on price. When a ship owner is faced with the choice between a Turkish yard offering $350 per ton and Chittagong, where the offer is $450, they will inevitably lean towards the millions of dollars in savings. Until international regulations render this disparity illegal or economically unfeasible, the situation will remain fundamentally unchanged. Now, let's return to the satellite image of Chittagong. You now see this beach in a different light. It is not merely a ship graveyard, it is a pivotal point in the global system where every parameter is interconnected. The price of steel in South Asia is high enough to make recycling profitable. Labor costs are low enough to justify manual dismantling. The tidal range is sufficient to pull vessels ashore without dry docks. The demand for construction steel is colossal in rapidly growing economies. Environmental regulations are lenient enough not to cripple the industry. Change any of these factors and the system collapses. Raise safety standards to European levels and dismantling costs will soar, shipyards will close, and vessels will begin to rust at anchorages worldwide, creating an even greater environmental crisis. Ban the export of ships for recycling, and you deprive tens of thousands of people of their only source of income, while cutting off access to affordable steel for countries that desperately need it. Leave everything as it is, and people will continue to suffer and die while the coastline remains poisoned. This is not a balance to be proud of, but it is a balance that exists. Not because someone designed it, but because economic, physical, and social forces have found an intersection. Ugly, painful, yet resilient. Within this corridor lie hidden aspects that are easily overlooked. The shipyards of Chittagong and Alang are the largest suppliers of cheap steel for the domestic market. Up to 80% of the recycled steel goes into construction, homes, bridges, roads for millions who otherwise could not afford them. The secondary market for equipment supports hundreds of thousands of small businesses with anchor chains, pumps, generators, and even furniture. Entire ecosystems of small enterprises thrive around these beaches. Shipbreaking is not just pollution and danger, it is also the lifeblood of the economy, without which these regions would plunge into even deeper poverty. And therein lies, I believe, the bittersweet beauty of this engineering economic system. Shipbreaking is not a technical problem with a clean solution. It is a constant negotiation between the physics of steel structures, the economics of impoverished nations, the ecology of coastal ecosystems, and the lives of people working with gas cutters for a few dollars a day. There is no right answer here. There is only compromise, hard, unjust, and yet inevitable. Every ship that leaves the yard carries with it the future of this beach. 30 years at sea, and then Chittagong, or Alang, or Gadani. A cycle that begins at a shipyard in South Korea and ends on the sands of the Bay of Bengal. And here's what makes me ponder. We've talked about ships that come to be dismantled voluntarily, for economic reasons. But what happens to the ships that never reach shore? To the vessels that have sunk in the ocean, lying at depths of thousands of meters, with cargoes of oil, chemicals, and sometimes even nuclear materials? What becomes of these underwater time bombs, and why is the world only now beginning to grasp the scale of this issue? I've created a separate video that delves into this in detail. You can find it on the channel.